December 12, 1964. Motown's executive conference room. Berry Gordy was planning the biggest showcase of his career, a private event where Detroit's elite would witness what he called the future of American music. But there was a problem. Jackie Wilson, the undisputed king of live performance, had just walked into Berry's office and said something that would set in motion one of the most legendary nights in soul music history. "Marvin's a great singer, Berry. Beautiful voice. But he can't move a crowd like I do. Put him on that stage and your guests will be checking their watches." Berry Gordy sat in silence. He knew Jackie wasn't wrong. Marvin Gaye had the voice of an angel, but on stage he was stiff, uncomfortable, almost apologetic in his presence. Jackie Wilson, on the other hand, was electricity. He could do backflips while hitting perfect notes. He could make 10,000 people lose their minds with a single spin. He was the greatest live performer soul music had ever produced, and everyone knew it. What Jackie Wilson didn't know was that Marvin Gaye was standing just outside the door. He had come to discuss the showcase setlist with Berry, and he heard every word. Marvin didn't knock, he didn't interrupt. He simply turned around and walked back down the hallway, his footsteps echoing against the walls of Hitsville, USA. When he reached the stairwell, he sat down on the steps and stared at his hands. They were shaking. They always shook before performances, sometimes during performances, sometimes just thinking about performances. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned his stage presence. The reviews were always the same. Incredible voice, limited movement. A recording artist, not a performer. Better suited for the studio than the stage. Marvin had read them all. He had internalized them all. And now Jackie Wilson, the man whose stage show Marvin had studied obsessively, was telling Berry Gordy the same thing. The showcase was scheduled for December 18th, 6 days away. Berry had already confirmed the guest list. Henry Ford II would be there. Executives from Capitol Records, critics from Billboard and Cashbox. This was Motown's chance to prove that Detroit could produce music as sophisticated and powerful as anything coming out of New York or Los Angeles. And Berry Gordy needed his artists to be flawless. That afternoon, Berry called Marvin into his office. Jackie was gone. It was just the two of them. Berry didn't mention the conversation, but Marvin knew that Berry knew. There was a weight in the room that neither of them acknowledged. "I'm putting you and Jackie on the same night," Berry said. "He'll open. You'll close." Marvin looked at Berry for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" "Because I believe in you." "You believe in my voice," Marvin said quietly, "not in my performance." Berry didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his tone was careful, measured. "Jackie moves like a boxer. You move like a poet. They're different things. The question is whether people want poetry that night." Marvin stood up. "What if they don't?" "Then we'll know," Berry said. For the next 6 days, Marvin barely slept. He would go to the studio at midnight and stay until dawn, running through songs, experimenting with arrangements, trying to find something that would work on stage, something that would make people forget about Jackie Wilson's backflips and splits and spins. But every time he rehearsed, he felt the gap between what he could do and what Jackie could do growing wider. On the second night, he tried choreography. He hired one of Motown's dance instructors who had worked with the Temptations. For 3 hours, she walked him through basic steps: side step, turn, snap, spin, pause, gesture. Movements that came naturally to Jackie felt foreign in Marvin's body. His limbs felt heavy. His timing was off. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he saw someone playing dress-up. The instructor was kind but honest. "You're thinking too much," she said. "Your body is fighting your brain." "What if they're both right to fight?" Marvin asked. She didn't have an answer for that. On the 4th night, Marvin broke down. He was alone in Studio A, the same room where he had recorded Pride and Joy and Hitchhike, the same room where everything had felt possible. But now with the showcase looming, everything felt impossible. He sat at the piano and played nothing, just pressed random keys, creating discordant sounds that matched the chaos in his mind. He thought about canceling. He thought about telling Berry that he was sick, that he couldn't do it, that putting him on the same bill as Jackie Wilson was a mistake that would humiliate both of them. But he knew what Berry would say, that Motown didn't build its reputation on safety, that great artists took risks, that Marvin needed to trust his gift. But what if his gift wasn't enough? What if the thing that made him special in the studio, the vulnerability in his voice, the emotional nakedness, was exactly what would make him forgettable on stage? On the afternoon of December 18, Marvin sat in his dressing room at the Fox Theater, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His suit was immaculate. His hair was perfect. He looked like a star. But when he stood up and tried to move, tried to dance, tried to inhabit his body the way Jackie Wilson did, he felt ridiculous, mechanical, fake. There was a knock on the door. It was Smokey Robinson. Smokey didn't say anything. He just sat down next to Marvin and handed him a cigarette. They smoked in silence for a while. Then Smokey said something that Marvin would remember for the rest of his life. "Jackie's out there right now warming up. You know what he's doing? He's practicing his moves. You know what you should be doing? Nothing. Because the moment you try to be Jackie, you stop being Marvin, and Marvin is what people need." Marvin looked at Smokey. "What if Marvin isn't enough?" "Then Motown's been lying to itself for 3 years," Smokey said. "But I don't think we have." At 8:47 p.m., Jackie Wilson took the stage. The Fox Theater held about 5,000 people, but tonight it was an intimate crowd of just 300. Detroit's power brokers, music industry insiders, people who had seen everything. He opened with Lonely Teardrops, and within 30 seconds, the entire room was on its feet. Jackie didn't just sing, he performed, he danced, he spun. He dropped to his knees and belted notes that seemed impossible while moving that fast. For 15 minutes, Jackie Wilson gave a masterclass in showmanship. Every gesture calculated, every move designed to elicit a response. By the time he finished, the applause was deafening. Backstage, Marvin heard it. The roar, the standing ovation, the sound of Jackie Wilson proving exactly what he had told Berry Gordy, that he could move a crowd in ways Marvin never could. Berry appeared in Marvin's dressing room doorway. "You're up in 5. Marvin nodded. His hands were shaking again. He tried to still them, but they wouldn't stop. Berry noticed. He walked over and put a hand on Marvin's shoulder. "Don't try to beat him at his game," Berry said. "Play yours." Marvin walked to the side of the stage. He could see Jackie in the wings on the opposite side, still catching his breath, sweat dripping from his face, grinning. When Jackie saw Marvin, he nodded. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't mocking. It was almost respectful, as if to say, "Good luck following that." The MC's voice echoed through the theater. "Ladies and gentlemen, Motown Records is proud to present Marvin Gaye." Marvin walked onto the stage. The applause was polite, warm but not ecstatic. These people had just watched Jackie Wilson defy physics. What could Marvin possibly do that would matter after that? He reached the microphone. The spotlight was hot. The crowd was waiting. And Marvin did something that nobody expected. He didn't move. He just stood there, completely still, and then he began to sing. The song was "Stubborn Kind of Fellow." It was one of Marvin's early hits, an up-tempo number that Jackie probably would have used for a high-energy dance routine. But Marvin didn't dance. He barely moved. He just held the microphone, closed his eyes, and sang. At first, the crowd didn't know how to react. This was so different from what they had just witnessed. No backflips, no splits, no spins. Just a man standing in a spotlight, singing. In the third row, a music critic from Billboard shifted in his seat. In the balcony, Henry Ford II checked his watch. But Marvin wasn't performing for them. Not yet. He was performing for himself. For the part of himself that had been terrified for 6 days. He was proving he didn't need to be Jackie Wilson. 30 seconds into the song, something began to change. The band behind him started to feel it. They had played this song 100 times, but never like this. Marvin wasn't rushing. He wasn't trying to impress. He was just being present, and his presence was pulling them in. By the first chorus, people stopped shifting in their seats. The critic from Billboard put down his pen. Henry Ford II stopped checking his watch, because something was happening that couldn't be measured by movement or spectacle. Marvin's voice was reaching into the room like a physical thing, touching every person individually, making them forget where they were and who they were supposed to be. They weren't watching a performance anymore. They were inside it. Then something happened that nobody had planned for. During the second verse, Marvin opened his eyes and looked directly at the audience, not at everyone, at individuals. He made eye contact with a woman in the front row, and for 3 seconds, it felt like he was singing only to her. Then he shifted his gaze to a man in the balcony, and that man felt the same thing. Marvin was creating hundreds of private concerts inside one public performance. It was intimate in a way that stadium showmanship could never be. But then, something even more powerful occurred. People started listening, really listening, not to the spectacle, but to the voice, to the phrasing, to the emotion in every word. They started hearing the lyrics, the actual words. Lines they had heard on the radio dozens of times suddenly meant something different when Marvin sang them 3 feet away, looking into their eyes, letting them see his vulnerability. When Marvin reached the bridge, his voice did something unexpected. It cracked, just slightly, a tiny imperfection in an otherwise flawless performance. In any other context, it would have been a mistake. But in this moment, it was everything. Because that crack revealed something real. It revealed vulnerability. It revealed humanity. And the crowd felt it. In that crack, they heard their own imperfections, their own struggles, their own moments of breaking. The woman in the front row who Marvin had looked at earlier started crying. She didn't know why. The song wasn't sad, but something in that cracked note had unlocked something in her chest, and tears came before she could stop them. By the time Marvin finished the song, something had changed in the room. The applause wasn't just polite anymore, it was genuine. But Marvin wasn't done. He moved into his next song, Pride and Joy, and then into Can I Get a Witness? 3 songs, 12 minutes, 0 choreography. Just Marvin, the microphone, and a voice that seemed to reach into the chest of every person in that theater and touch something they didn't know needed touching. When Marvin sang the final note, the crowd didn't just applaud. Half of them were crying, grown men in expensive suits, women in evening gowns. People who had come to be impressed were leaving devastated, in the best possible way. Backstage, Marvin walked past Jackie Wilson. Jackie was standing in the wings watching. His expression was unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the crowd's applause was still echoing through the theater. But back here, in this narrow corridor between the stage and the dressing rooms, it was quiet. Just 2 men who had both given everything they had. Jackie's shirt was still soaked with sweat from his own performance. His breathing had finally steadied, but there was something in his eyes that Marvin had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was something closer to recognition. The recognition that he had just witnessed something he couldn't replicate, no matter how high he jumped or how fast he spun. Then Jackie said something so quietly that Marvin almost didn't hear it. I make them move. You make them feel. I don't know which one's harder. Marvin looked at Jackie. I do, he said. Yours is harder, but mine is what I have. Jackie nodded slowly. There was a respect in that nod that hadn't been there 6 days earlier when he had told Berry Gordy that Marvin couldn't move a crowd, because now Jackie understood what Marvin had understood all along, that there was more than one way to move a crowd, and that sometimes the deepest movement happened when the performer stood perfectly still. 2 hours later, the Fox Theater was empty except for Berry Gordy, Marvin, and a handful of Motown staff. Berry was smoking a cigar, staring at the stage. Do you know what Henry Ford told me tonight? Berry asked. Marvin shook his head. He said, Jackie Wilson is the greatest performer I've ever seen, but Marvin Gaye is the only one who made me forget I was watching a performance. Marvin didn't respond. For years, he had believed that his inability to move like Jackie was a weakness. But tonight, that limitation had become his strength. Because in refusing to be Jackie Wilson, Marvin had discovered something far more powerful. Stillness, presence, truth. The story of that night spread through the music industry like wildfire. Not because Marvin Gaye had beaten Jackie Wilson in some kind of competition, but because he had proven that there was more than one way to move a crowd. Jackie Wilson made people lose their minds. Marvin Gaye made them find their hearts. Both were valid, both were necessary, but only one of them would define the next decade of soul music. Because what Marvin proved that night wasn't just about technique or performance, it was about truth. And truth, when delivered with complete vulnerability, was more powerful than any choreographed move could ever be. In the years that followed, Jackie Wilson's career continued with the same explosive energy that had made him a legend. But Marvin's career evolved into something else entirely. He became the artist who proved that you didn't need to dance to connect, that sometimes the most powerful movement was no movement at all. Jackie Wilson never publicly spoke about that night in detail, but in a 1975 interview, shortly before his tragic stroke, he said something that revealed everything. People always asked me why I moved so much on stage. The truth? I was afraid that if I stood still, they'd see through me. Marvin wasn't afraid of that. He stood still and let them see everything. That takes courage I never had. In September 1975, Jackie Wilson suffered a massive heart attack on stage while performing Lonely Teardrops in New Jersey. He would spend the final 9 years of his life in a semi-comatose state, unable to speak or move. During those years, Marvin Gaye sent flowers to Jackie's hospital room every month. He never visited, saying it would be too painful to see the greatest performer he'd ever known trapped in a motionless body. But he never stopped sending those flowers. And with each delivery, there was a note, always the same message. You taught me the stage. I taught you the soul. We're even, brother. Jackie Wilson died on January 21, 1984. Marvin Gaye died exactly 2 months and 11 days later, on April 1, 1984. Two kings of soul, gone within months of each other. One had conquered the stage through movement. One had conquered it through stillness. Together they had shown the world that there was no single way to reach the human heart.